afternoon, pilot teachers, and good afternoon, students.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sani.
Thank you. Sit down. Our lesson today, lesson 89, is going to be basically revision so that we will complete the first part in our little booklet, the booklet on climate. The next lesson, which is going to be tomorrow, we are going to actually move on to the next subtopic, and the next subtopic is going to be on the atmosphere. So to complete the work on the first part of our booklet on climate, we are going to do some revision work in our lesson today. So our lesson today is basically all on revision of what we have covered on the two important movements that the Earth does. And we will start off with revision questions and then some activities, which I have already provided on the monitor. Okay, we start off now with our revision on the work on part 1 in our booklet on climate. There are two very important movements that the Earth does. Frank, can you tell us those two movements?
Rotation and revolution.
Okay, very good. We have rotation and revolution. To demonstrate that with a globe, rotation is simply the movement from west to east that the Earth does on its axis. And for the Earth to complete one full rotation, it takes 24 hours. The second movement is the movement of revolution. And the Earth, while it rotates on its axis every 24 hours, it also revolves around the sun every 365 and a quarter days. The revolution of the Earth around the sun is actually very important also, in the sense that we need to know the motion that it does. Rather than a secular motion around the sun, it orbits around the sun in oval shape type motion. Okay, so if I have to demonstrate the secular motion, if we assume that this particular stand here is actually the sun, the secular motion is simply a circle created in terms of the motion of the Earth around the sun. But that is not what the Earth does in its orbit or its rotation, not rotation, but revolution around the sun. The way that the sun orbits is in this motion. So beside the movement of rotation on its axis every 24 hours, the Earth orbits in this motion. So you watch. If I'm looking at the North Pole in line with the sun, when the Earth is in this position, the Earth on its axis tilted at 66.5 degrees. At this time of the year, in line with the sun, we note that the North Pole is actually closest to the sun. In its orbit, it will take 3 months when the equator is now directly in line with the sun. The North Pole and the South Pole are at about equal distance away from the sun. So this is 3 months later. I started off here. The North Pole was closest to the sun. The South Pole furthest away. It will take about 3 months where the equator is closest to the sun. The north and the south are at equal distance away from the sun. Another 3 months, we now see the South Pole is closest to the sun and the North Pole is furthest away. Another 3 months, we now have the equator closer to the sun, the north and the south at equal distance away from the direct rays of the sun. And then we start off again in the position North Pole closest, the South Pole furthest. But the motion that it does is not the secular motion like this. Rather, we go in an oval shape motion around. You note that the Earth is static in terms of, or steady on its position. It is the movement around, which will allow the different sections of the Earth to be directly to the sun's rays, resulting then in the seasons as well as the varying length of day and night. So Frank, the rotation movement every 24 hours on its axis, and at the same time, while it is rotating on its axis, it is also revolving around the sun in a orbital or oval shape type movement, okay? And it will take 365 and a quarter days for the complete revolution. Okay, so those two movements. Now we move on. Rebecca, I already mentioned that one of the effects of the movement revolution is the different seasons which are experienced. What is the other effect of the Earth's movement in terms of its revolution around the sun? 365 and a quarter days. What is the other effect?
Varying length of day and night.
Okay, very good. So the two main effects which comes about as a result of the Earth's revolution around the sun is one, the different seasons experienced mainly in the temperate regions, and two, the varying length of day and night in the different hemisphere. So when the sun is directly above the Tropic of Cancer, which is in the northern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere regions experience longer days and shorter nights. Meanwhile, it is the opposite in the southern hemisphere, and then vice versa. When the sun is directly above the Tropic of Capricorn, which is in the furthest point to the south or in the southern hemisphere, then areas in the southern hemisphere experience longer days and shorter nights, and it is the opposite in the northern hemisphere. So the two important effects as a result of the Earth's revolution are seasons and the varying length of day and night. Christopher, what are the two effects which results from the movement of rotation?
Day and night.
Day and night, that's one. What is the other one, the other effect also beside day and night?
Difference in heating of the Earth's surface.
Okay, very good. So those are the two effects that we have looked at. Day and night, when the Earth is actually rotating on its axis every 24 hours, we have 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night. But again, it will depend on where the sun is directly overhead at which hemisphere for the equal day and nights, and also the varying depending on whether the sun is closest in the north or closest in the southern hemisphere. Okay, the second one is to do with the difference in the heating of the Earth's surface. Generally, we know that during the day, the hottest time during the day will be about mid-time or lunchtime. That's when the sun is directly above, and that's where the intense heating is. So the temperatures would be greatest during midday, generally. Towards the afternoon, the temperatures start to drop. In the morning, the temperatures start to rise because the sun also rises to the highest point at midday. The temperatures are the hottest, and then in the afternoon or towards the afternoon, the temperatures start to decrease. That's what we are talking about when we're looking at difference in the heating of the Earth's surface. We are going to look at, in terms of the difference in the heating, a little bit more when we come to looking at the next topic on the atmosphere, and that's when we are going to discuss a little bit more on insolation. But we'll come to that in our next lesson. We'll move on. From those two different movements, it's important that we know it takes 365 and a quarter days for a complete revolution, and it takes 24 hours for a complete rotation. We also looked at how the how the Earth actually journeys around the sun and the seasons that are caused. We looked at two diagrams. One of those diagrams showed us the apparent movement of the sun, and the second diagram is as displayed on the monitor. Both of them are referring, or they are supposed to explain the same concept. I demonstrated the movement of the earth using the example there with the globe at different times of the year when the hemispheres are tilted towards the sun, the different seasons are actually experienced. This is one way in which we can actually show that information. And the second way would be using the cross-sectional diagram where we have 23.5 degrees north, the equator, 23.5 degrees south, and the movement around with the seasons occurring in between. Two important words did come up, and those two words, I also mentioned that it's important you know what they are. Susan, when the sun is actually directly above the tropics, what is the term that we use to describing that period of time when the sun is directly above the tropics? Gibest, are you going to help? We're looking at the revolution of the earth around the sun, and we're looking at the time of the year and the term that is used to describing that time when the sun is directly above the tropics.
Solstice. Solstice.
Okay, we have solstices, correct. Solstices, that's the time of the year when the sun is directly above the tropics. And when I'm looking at tropics, it's the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. Marianne, what are the two seasons that are experienced during solstices?
Winter and summer.
Okay, very good. We have winter and summer. What is the term that we use to describing the time when the sun is directly above the equator?
Equinox.
Equinox. That's correct. Dorothy, the seasons which occur during this particular time or the equinox?
Autumn and spring.
Autumn and spring. During those times also, it's important, winter and summer solstices also comes in with varying length of day and night, longer days, shorter nights. Spring and autumn equinox is to do with the equal amount of day and equal amount of night, right throughout the different hemisphere. Okay, we'll move on. We also looked at the seasons which are experienced, and we mentioned that seasons that we are dealing with are mainly those that are experienced in the temperate regions. Noel, what are those 4 seasons that we have looked at which occurs in the temperate regions? Those 4 seasons which occurs in the temperate regions, what are they?
Spring, summer, autumn, winter.
Okay, very good. We have spring, summer, autumn, and winter. We did, in our last lesson, we looked at some of the characteristics of those different seasons and how we can recognize the main features. Not only that, we looked at some of the activities that occurs or that takes place during those times. So let's recap again on those different seasons. We can make reference to the very simple definition given from the chart here and also information presented on our monitor. Okay, seasons of the temperate region. Spring. This is the season which occurs between winter and summer. Between winter and summer is that season, spring. We discussed in our last lesson that this is the time of the year when plants start to bloom, new shoots appear. Also, that's the time of the year when the temperatures start to rise. The main characteristics that you were able to pick up from our discussion was mainly looking at new plant growth. Okay, if we had to look at some of the samples of what we have done on spring, we're looking at flowers here blooming, Some samples or examples that we have already looked at for spring. Someone in the class did mention that this is the time when people pick flowers. Very good. Okay, that's on spring. Then the next season we also discussed was that of summer. Note, summer is the season which occurs between spring and autumn. So spring and autumn, in between, is the season summer. We also note that this is the time of the year when temperatures are at its highest in comparison to those three other seasons. Summer is actually characterized by a lot of things, mainly summer activities such as sunbathing, picnic, swimming, boating, sailing, and even harvesting. The sun, clear skies also are some of the characteristics that we look at to tell us that the season could be summer season. Okay, some of the samples of pictures we had on summer. We note this is mainly harvesting of the crops here, which occurs perhaps during summer. We had the melting of snow and ice. As a result, perhaps this river here would be frozen during winter, but in summer, it is actually not frozen. Water is flowing freely. We have springs, waterfalls, picnic time perhaps during this time. A lot of people look at going to the beach, etc., as part of the activities done during the summer season. Okay, then we moved on. We looked at autumn, which is the next season. Autumn is the season which occurs between summer and winter. So between summer and winter is the season autumn. If spring is the time of the year when temperatures start to rise, because after spring will come the season summer. So the temperatures start to rise and we come to summer. Then after summer comes the season autumn, and that's when the temperatures start to fall. Autumn is characterized mainly by the falling of leaves, or also the changing of the colors on trees, mainly the colors of the leaves from green to perhaps yellow, brown, or reddish color. Some of the activities that could be carried out during this time is raking because of the excessive leaves that are falling, and also storage, collecting of firewood and storing them away ready for the next season. Here are some of the collections of what we have looked at on autumn. You can see the colors on plants especially changing. Here's a very good maybe sample of autumn and the changes in the color of the leaves. Okay, and finally, from what we have covered already in our discussion, the last of the seasons then is winter. This is the season which occurs between autumn and spring. So the season that occurs between autumn and spring is winter. Okay, it's the time of the year when temperatures are lowest or coldest. Summer is the opposite. The temperatures are highest or it is the hottest. In winter, the temperatures are lowest or also coldest, and characterized mainly by activities which are common during the winter season. Snow and ice would be the main features that we look at to tell us that it is perhaps winter. Skiing, winter games like the Olympic games, which are maybe carried out or are played during the winter, would also cater for those different activities carried out during those times. Okay, for most of those seasons, it's because we do not experience them in Papua New Guinea. We would have to actually read and find out a lot about them and maybe look at pictures to really understand what is actually experienced, and also how to recognize those different seasons which occur, because they are seasons which occur mainly in the temperate regions. Okay, some of the pictures or photographs to go with winter. Again, snow and ice would be the common features that we look at to tell us it's winter. Now to some activities. I'm going to put up a couple of activities on the board. Sorry, not on the board, but on the monitor. Your task is simply to read those activities. If you can make note of them quickly, you go ahead to doing that, but you would also be required to write down next to each of the statements whether the statement is actually true or false. Okay, we have 2 activities per slide. I will give you at least 2 minutes to copy if you'd like to. Otherwise, what you can simply do is just read and then write down whether you think the statements that are given are true or whether you think the statements that are given are false. So that's what we are going to work on now. You can work in pairs to come up with your answers. And all you have to do is write down true or false in your exercise book. And there are 12 activities. We'll start with those 2 on the monitor. So you can make note now of the 2 last statements, that is 11 and 12. And then you will be required to ensure that you have all the answers ready for correction in our lesson tomorrow. Okay, with that class, that will also bring us to the end of our lesson. Do complete those 12 statements for your homework by simply writing down true or false next to each one. And we'll go through the corrections in the next lesson. Class, if you can stand up now. To the pilot teachers, our keyword for lesson 89 is solstices. Good afternoon and thank you, students.